All right, so in the last session today, we're going to cover what's typically in the scope of work section and some key considerations to keep in mind. So first, I'll give a short presentation, about 10 minutes, on some of the key scope of work considerations, and then we'll have about a half hour for the industry experts panel, where we'll have an buyer's representative as well as a developer to answer some of the do's and don'ts questions you have related to the scope of work. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with some work time for you all to start drafting your city or county's scope of work section in the RFP template. So the scope of work section identifies the developer's project responsibilities and requirements. So this section typically contains a few subsections, including design guidelines, code specifications, equipment warranties, inspection and commissioning, logistics there, any requested system monitoring, details on that. In a similar vein, operation and maintenance, if that's something that you're requiring or requesting the developer to do, what happens at the end of the contract life, specifying that. And then lastly, sometimes there's a final design package that's included just so the developer knows the full scope after the RFP is done. So this is kind of at a high level, the sections that are involved. A lot to cover in 10 or 15 minutes, so I'm just gonna focus on 4 of these: the design guidelines, system monitoring, O&M, and end of contract, and provide some information to at least get you thinking in these sections that are a little bit more project specific. The other ones are a little bit boilerplate, typically just what's included in an RFP. So hopefully these 4 sections will add some new information to your repertoire and bring some questions that you have as I'm going through this presentation. If you have any questions that come up, save those for the developer panel or the industry experts panel that we'll be having in about 10 minutes, because we'll have some dedicated time for them to answer some of those. So jumping into the design guidelines. So specifying exactly what to optimize for and other preferences in your RFP helps the developers provide accurate bids while meeting your needs. So a couple examples here. If you're looking at a rooftop solar project, it's helpful to in the RFP, in the design guidelines, specify, do you want the developer to maximize the system size, so utilize all the available roof area, or are you more interested in optimizing for cost savings? So maybe they only use half of the roof area and tilt it at a certain angle to optimize for cost savings. So specifying what you want them to optimize for is helpful. And then any other load factors that might be helpful, like snow or extreme wind, hurricane, earthquake, things like that, and the necessary factors that they have to design to, given your location. If you're looking at a ground-mounted system, it's the same thing as before, letting them know whether they should utilize all the available land area you've outlined, or should they optimize for cost savings or something else. Also letting the developer know, are you looking for additional benefits, like maybe a priority is co-benefits like native pollinator friendly prairies that can go hand in hand with a ground mounted system, or maybe livestock raising integrated into the system. This is helpful for the developer to know if they should be including this in their bid. For parking solar, same first bullet, optimize to the system size to use all the parking lot area, or optimize for cost savings. Some helpful things for the developer to know here is, do they have discretion to change the landscape? So can they remove any trees that are in the parking lot? Can they restripe the surface or reduce the spaces? This all affects the design that the developer would come up with. Moving on to system monitoring. So there's 2 aspects that I've pulled out of this subsection, which is 1, performance monitoring, but also public educational access. Could be 2 benefits to be integrated into the remote monitoring that you're requesting the developer to include. So first, on performance monitoring, if the facility has a building automation system or a BAS, integrating the PV performance into that facility's BAS can help with smart building operations. So it can help the building to know how they can optimize to reduce peak demand, things of that nature. But if the facility does not have a building automation system, a separate remote monitoring system is still helpful to flag malfunctions that the system is having, things like that, any type of performance flags. Educational access is something that was brought up in a previous session on, so what if visibility and community engagement, educational access are some of your priorities, but the rooftops aren't actually visible to the public. One way to provide more visibility and educational access could be through showing the system metrics on physical kiosks at the sites so that they can kind of provide that visibility at the ground level, or providing or integrating the system metrics into the city or county website, so that any community member can just log on to your website and see how the systems are performing. So those are two aspects to consider with system monitoring and what you want to include in the RFP if you're interested in that. And then with operation and maintenance, so with third-party owned systems, the third party will always be doing the operation and maintenance. That's part of the third-party owned asset. So always include O&M requirements for third-party owned systems in the RFP. But even sometimes if for city-owned projects, if it's a large project that maybe your facility staff aren't comfortable with operating, you could consider including O&M requirements for city-owned systems as well. So first, with third-party ownership, this would be something like a power purchase agreement or a solar lease, requiring that the developer has some type of notification system to flag underperformance, and just how that notification system would work. And then also annual or quarterly system performance reports, just to bring some accountability to that third party to make sure that the system is operating as it's designed. And then, as I said before, for direct ownership, so for an engineer procurement construction project, you're going to specify O&M only if you're requesting the third party O&M services in the RFP, typical with larger projects. So either way, though, if the city is going to be responsible for O&M, so the facilities managers are required to operate and maintain, the RFP should still require the developer to provide equipment and O&M manuals so that the facility staff can operate it accordingly, and potentially train the facility staff as well on that equipment. All right, so the last part here, keeping this presentation pretty quick so we can get into the developer and industry experts panel, is the end of contract life is something to consider including. So stating your preferred options, one, helps to enable accurate price proposals for the developer, but it's also helpful just to have this conversation with city departments early on so that you know ahead of time what you'd like to happen at the end of the contract. And this is specifically for third-party owned systems. So at the end of a 20-year contract, who's responsible for what, and so on and so forth. So one option would just be requiring the developer to remove the system, so decommission the system at the end of the contract life. Another option could be providing a decommissioning bond at the beginning of the contract. So some options there. And also just ensuring that the developer restores the site to its previous condition. So having that stated in the RFP, which is typically more important with ground mounted, but is important with all of the types as well. Another option that we spoke a little bit about this in one of the previous webinars was an option for the city or county to purchase the system at the end of the contract life, either using the fair market value at that time or the proposer specified price in the contract. So that's an option that you could request in the RFP, is including that option in the bid proposal. The last option is probably an early buyout. So in the RFP, requesting that the developer provide the city or county the option to buy the system out at a certain, before the contract end, but at a specified year. So let's say at year 7 and year 15, a specified buyout option, which would be determined by the fair market value or the specified price from the proposer. So these are some options that you could include in your RFP and could impact the price proposal that the developer or proposer submits. So now we can jump into the industry experts panel. So asking about the do's and don'ts related to the scope of work. we have speakers from Soul Systems and Black Bear that are joining this discussion. So Jill Rathke and Mark Cooper from Soul Systems and Victoria Stolgis from Black Bear Energy are on to answer any questions that you have regarding the scope of work. If you have other questions outside of scope of work, consider saving that for tomorrow, because we'll have a similar panel set up in the afternoon tomorrow for everyone to answer those, for these same speakers to answer those questions as well. So first, I'll just have Jill and Mark give a very quick introduction of some of their background and what they do at Soul Systems, trying to keep it to maybe a minute or two each. And I think I see Jill. Yep.
Yeah, I can start. I think Mark's on the line too. Yeah, I'm Jill Rathke, and I work on our project origination team, which is basically the sales team at Soul Systems. So we are a nationwide developer and financier, and we're based in Washington, D.C. On the sales team, I mostly just do a lot of coordination between the experts we have across the team, from the investments and finance team to the engineering team, the asset ownership team. And so I work with other analysts and managers to create proposals for municipalities like you all, as well as commercial and industrial customers. I'll let Mark introduce himself too.
Thanks, Jill.
And this is Mark in the engineering group here at Soul Systems. Our group supports the team that Jill works on at the proposal stage for any of our potential customers, with technical inputs on any engineering inputs needed to put that proposal together. When we're awarded a project, our engineers do stick with the project through the point of NTP, notice to proceed, which is right before construction start. Again, working on more detailed engineering and optimization from a technical aspect. I've been doing that for about 4 years here at Soul Systems, and for about 8 years before that, I also worked in solar at a separate company, doing later stage engineering work, the detailed construction design work for similar systems.
Thanks, Mark.
And I'm Victoria Stolgis with Black Bear Energy. I've been with Black Bear for 3 years and previously worked at RMI. So know Allie and some of the other colleagues working on the program. Black Bear Energy, we're an owner's representative for on-site renewables. So not a developer. We act kind of more as a broker, a consultant. Our clients are mainly institutional property owners, so we work mostly with REITs. We have done some consulting work with a municipality before, but the lion's share of our work is on-site solar. So what we basically do is help to identify within a client's portfolio the best opportunities for solar based on the markets and specifics within that property. We will run RFPs for our clients, and if they like the results, we have attorneys on staff who help to negotiate contracts, and then we have project managers who oversee the development and construction.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, thank you all for that quick intro to give some background on your expertise and your work at each of those developers and industry experts as well. So now, before we get into the actual Q&A, I thought it would be helpful to do something a little bit different, to actually have the participants on this call type their questions onto the screen using this annotation feature we've been using in the last couple sections to get a sense of where the energy in the room is around certain questions, so we don't get too bogged down on a question that maybe not everyone is interested in. So a little bit of democracy of questions that people have. So if you can, again, just go to the top of your screen and click the View Options button, click Annotate, and then click the text feature in the annotation option. And that will allow you to type any questions that you have onto the screen, and I'll try to group questions together if they're a similar topic. And hopefully from this exercise, we can at least have a couple questions to start from, and then I'll open it up to just Q&A after that. All right, so it looks like we've got some questions around pricing, which maybe we'll start with there, around cost for educational kiosks. If that's typical, what make it difficult to provide accurate pricing and using a financial analysis? So maybe we'll start there with that question and then move to secondly, just general frustrating aspects that you might see in a scope of work or just common mistakes that you see. Yeah, I'll start it off with, we'll start with Victoria to say maybe her perspective on the educational kiosks, if that's something that's typical with projects or if that's an additional cost that is less typical.
So I've actually never been asked that question before. I think maybe it's something that the REITs aren't interested in. So maybe Soul Systems has an answer to that question. That was the one question I've never heard before.
Okay, we'll start with either Jill or Mark then.
I can jump in for a minute on that one. I think that as a developer, we're good at solar. We're not especially good at kiosks. What we can provide very easily and for free is a web link to all of the data coming off the system, which is typically what people want to show, a scrolling set of graphs and so on that not only show the production, but it'll compare that to cars taken off the road or trees not cut down, those types of things. That's very easy. For the most part, that can be put on any flat screen that can be connected to the internet these days. Mm-hmm. So that's also extremely inexpensive. People know that flat screen TVs are only a couple $100 these days. So that's all pretty easy. If you want something more elaborate, like a nice wooden case, or if you want to have some posters, surrounding the flat screen, that's a little bit outside of our area of expertise, and it's going to really depend on exactly what you want. So we like to just provide the internet link to all the data, and a TV is easy for us to provide as long as you can mount it in your facility somewhere where traffic is going to see it and so on.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And then I think a similar question, or not similar, but in the kind of general price proposal aspect, there was a question around what makes it easier to do kind of an apples to apples comparison with a financial analysis, kind of any do's and don'ts related to that. I can turn that over to Victoria, if that sounds good.
Yeah, we absolutely spend a ton of time trying to levelize proposals. So it's something that's taken years to keep making better and better. And so I think the initial RFP, how you structure it, we always try and make that kind of preempting levelization, but then we'll often get back bids and end up iterating an additional time and asking for updated bids based on changing key parameters. Two things that I see a lot on levelization are specifically around system size. So in a lot of cases, we will try to make sure that systems are coming in. It's okay to have some variety in system size, but for example, if you're looking at saying, okay, this system here is going to be load limited, then you can look and say you're sizing it to 90% or 85% of your existing load, then we will actually lock the generation in the bid form. So the annual kilowatt hours will be locked to 85% of how many kilowatt hours our clients have used historically. And so that enables you to get, system size has such a big impact on things like EPC pricing and economies of scale. So by getting that system size in a ballpark, not ranging more than say, a couple hundred kW, that can be really important. And, assuming it's a 1 to 2 megawatt deal. Another really important levelization factor is interconnection costs. Depending on a utility, interconnection costs will be all over the map. We use historical data to basically require that they budget based off what we've seen historically. So in somewhere like Con Ed, that could be as high as 10 to 25 cents, whereas in California, those costs are much lower. So knowing historically what an interconnection cost is in your specific utility zone can really help. That's definitely one of the unknowns, but theoretically, an interconnection cost should be the same regardless of developers. So you should be willing to limit it. Other couple things are, what type of ITC assumption are they using? Are they assuming that they're safe harboring the panels at the 30% number if they already have a large stockpile, or 26% for this year? So those are just a few of the ones that pop up. And again, we try and get as much right the first time around, and then be ready to, do a second round with shortlisted bidders to get everyone closer.
Thanks, Victoria. I know there was a question on the around the site visit, but I think we're going to cover site visits more in depth tomorrow. So I think I'll table that question to our developer panel tomorrow. And then there's also a question around coronavirus impacts and how that might impact project timeline and just generally starting to think about that. And I think I'll also table that till tomorrow because we have a session dedicated to project timeline and how coronavirus might impact that timeline. But these three experts will be back at the panel tomorrow, so feel free to tune in then as well. The other question that I saw some energy around was just at a high level, like what is your maybe top one or two things that when you see it in an RFP, you're like, oh man, like we're not going to bid on this project, or just general do's and don'ts that you would recommend cities and counties focus on when they're developing the scope of work section. So maybe I'll have both Soul Systems and BlackBerry answer this one. We can go back to Soul Systems if you want to jump in first.
We should have Jill take this one. She's the one reading the RFPs all the time.
I would say probably the two things that our team looks at first are, well, I guess the first most important thing is if there are solar friendly incentives available, which would allow us to offer you all a lower PPA rate. So in states where there are incentives available, we usually are keeping an eye on when incentives have filled up and have a good sense of what project might be too small, or if a carport just is going to be too expensive to be able to offer anybody savings, and can kind of know off the top of our head that maybe a 500 kilowatt carport just is never going to be able to offer savings. Additionally, we usually do a review of the site and do some sort of desktop diligence, just looking at Google Maps. So if the entire site is in a floodplain, occasionally you can build a solar project there, but it's not a good site at all. And so we might just discount and not even bid at all because that just seems too risky. Landfills maybe seem risky, but because they're capped, then usually have clear documentation as long as it's been capped in the past 20 years maybe. Landfills surprisingly are a good site for us, and we know that there's probably not going to be as many neighbors complaining. That's, I would say, the two things that we look at the most are system size and type, and then the site conditions, so the roof health or the site diligence level here.
Thanks, Jill.
Anything else, Mark?
I think that's a good set. A lot of it is just also finding developers comfortable with the region you're working in, and as Jill noted, the project sizes. So each developer is going to have their own sweet spot in terms of the region they work in and the size projects they like to do. So you want to make sure you reach out to developers to put in bids that are comfortable roughly with the box you're working in.
Great. Well, hopefully the site assessment work we've been doing in the last couple of webinars will be helpful to get those system sizes accurate and helpful for the developer to know what sizes are likely looking at. All right, Victoria.
Great. Well, I'll talk about kind of 3 points. The first is the channel partner or the developer list that you do reach out to, because I think that is critical. We have, I think, like 200 solar developers that we've spoken to in our platform. We work most closely with maybe 20 of them, but as Mark pointed out, every single developer is going to have an area they like to work in, a system size range that meets their sweet spot, different types of deal structures, whether they're willing to do third-party deals and finance them, if they're community solar developers, or if they're strictly just EPC contractors. So I think that is really critical, is having that list of solar developers. I think we found, the best ones to work with are, in fact, the regional players. They know the local incentives well, they know the utilities, and so certainly making sure that you've curated that list of partners and spoken to them on the phone in advance, get them interested in your project. And that brings me to my second point, like and so we're putting out the RFPs that, someone like Jill would look at. So our goal because we are mostly, we mostly get paid when projects get built. We're not, we're basically fee-based as opposed to consultant hours. And so we only focus on wanting to work with projects that we think will actually get built. So I'd say the two most important pieces there are, do we have a motivated client? And is there a good project that we're looking at? And so the motivated client piece, I think it's definitely up to all of you guys to make it clear. I think a lot of these projects and a lot of you guys are based in utilities where the economics aren't amazing, but you're obviously motivated to do this for a lot of reasons. And so making it clear that you're aware that there might not be as much savings as, say, a project in California where you're paying 25 cents per power, or a project in DC where the SREC is worth 40 cents a kilowatt hour. But that you guys are motivated to do these projects and have commitment at the highest level. So the motivated client piece, I think, is really key. And then from a good project scenario, things like, have you identified a good host site? If it's a roof, what's the roof age? Looking at the load that you guys have, making sure there are tons of interconnection points versus one, understanding the deal structure within that specific utility. So, we'll definitely have channel partners, which are the developers for us, who will look at a project and be like, I just don't even want to touch that utility, or it's a nightmare to deal with that building permit department. So definitely, yeah, there's a lot of things that go into the good project piece.
Thanks, Victoria. So I think a lot was brought up between both Black Bear and Soul Systems there on that answer. So I think for the last 10 or so minutes, I'll just open it up to follow-up questions on what was already said, or if you have a related or even unrelated question, feel free to ask that. So now I'll just open it up to anyone that has any questions. A question in the chat box that said, what is the best way to reach out to new developers who may not have worked for governments before? So are there any national trade associations, for example, that you would recommend we contact, I think, to start that conversation and interest the developers in their project?
That's a great question. When I joined a couple of years ago, I was like the channel partner relationship manager. So, I think it's a bunch of different ways. We have a bunch of developers that we work with that we come from relationships. So really asking around within your network, what solar developers or EPCs have you worked with before? Ask kind of anyone within the specific region that that might have done a solar project. So relationships are really important. And I'd say the developers we have the most deals with, people have relationships from working with them in former jobs. Obviously you guys don't do solar for a living, so I know that's harder. There are lists like solar contractors. They'll put out a website of like the top 100 solar contractors. And I think the important piece is differentiating between, are you looking for an actual developer who is going to bring finance and be able to offer you a PPA, and they would then probably bid out to a solar contractor, or are you wanting to work directly with a solar EPC, which normally would be if you're planning to own the project. So there are certainly lists you can Google, and Ryan, I can certainly send you some links as follow-up for like the top. I think SIA probably puts out a report on the top C&I developers. And I think, definitely anyone who works in the commercial and industrial solar space, if they haven't worked with a municipality, they're definitely, like, you guys are great customers because you're very credit worthy. So, and you own the land, you're going to plan to be there, for the foreseeable future. So, anyone who's been in C&I, there's no reason that they couldn't serve, the municipality as a customer base.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, that was super helpful. And I think it's good or reassuring to a lot of these cities or counties that have never done an on-site solar project before to know that developers would be interested in working with them, given the points that you made with having good credit and owning the land, being there for a long time, things of that nature.
I see a question in the chat which just says, simple question, how much response time is adequate?
Jill, do you want to answer that? And then I'll comment on how
Sure.
much we normally give.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a couple of questions about site visits, but site visits are definitely important. So providing a site visit time that's maybe a week or two after the RFP itself is released is important. And then allowing for developers to ask questions and giving yourselves time to respond to those is also important. So I think realistically, from the day that the RFP is released, maybe like 6 weeks is a reasonable due date, assuming you have the site visit and then have another week or two to ask questions and provide the answers for developers to update the proposal with. But,
We do, fortunately, have a section dedicated to that tomorrow on the RFP timelines. We can dive more into that as well. But if there is energy around the timeline and kind of site visit and coronavirus related delays and how that impacts the project timeline, if there aren't specific scope of work related questions, we could jump to that if no one has any other questions. But I'll start with the scope of work related questions if there's any of those remaining.
And then just our timeline, I mean, we do things very differently. I'd say we run basically 2-week RFPs, but we give extensions normally up to a week. We're definitely giving people more time with coronavirus because a lot of our solar developers are adjusting to work from home. But we do 2-week, we try and basically fix a bunch of assumptions, and we never do site visits as part of our initial RFPs. I do think, you know, a lot of the time, the majority of our work is roofs. And as long as a roof age is in good condition, what you can get from a site visit, you know, it's a little bit different than if you're looking at some complicated ground space. And then, you know, we do some carports as well. So understanding that there are benefits to doing site visits sooner rather than later, we have done them when we've done a best and final just with a short, you know, 2 or 3 shortlisted parties so that we don't get everyone out there for the site visit. But yeah, there are plenty of times where a contract is signed before a site visit even happens, which you're going to just need to depend on kind of how far along and certain you are in your kind of all the due diligence and feasibility questions.
So I have a question. How common is it to provide the utility information? Is that something that should be, you know, particularly if you're looking at a particular building, should you be providing that utility information or access to that? Is that expected?
I would say yes, there are definitely some corporations, Walmart, Iron Mountain, who do not share their utility bills from a combination of confidentiality, but it's also that they do not want, you know, people to just bid in 10% below what they're paying and take the rest of the value. Now, obviously by running an RFP, you're taking away part of that. So, you know, I do think there is certainly value in sharing utility bills. You know, if we don't share utility bills, we will share load and number of interconnection points. You know, load per meter is really important if you're having to interconnect to multiple meters. And then, you know, the other thing that you can lean on a developer for, we do it in-house with our analyst team, but they would run a solar offset rate. So there are definitely charges on your utility bill that even with solar, you're still going to get those. So being able to verify, you know, if I'm getting a 7-cent PPA rate and my all-in blended rate might be 9 cents, but in reality, my actual solar offset rate might be 7 cents. So, you know, as long as you can calculate your offset rate and be able to quantify against the PPA, what are your estimated savings? That's the other important piece. And then, you know, definitely supplying, you know, what utility you actually have. We've definitely had clients whose property is on a line of a utility map if you look at a layer, and so verifying that you're in the utility zone that everyone thinks you're in is also important.
And that could just be as easy as scanning some of your bills and including them as an appendix in the RFP, because all of the developers will be able to understand what parts of the rate can be offset by solar, so they can support you in that.
We do have a section in that RFP template kind of dedicated to either the actual bills that you have at those sites, so those monthly bills, or in some such situations, more kind of specific data on hourly load if you're interested in that in a more detailed analysis and more of a time of use structure area. We have a question with two of them. The first one is, have either of you done a solar lease for a municipality where you can't do a PPA, and you were able to monetize the ITC and bake that into the solar lease price?
I can just jump in, but Solar Systems has not yet. We've discussed doing a solar operating lease where we're able to do that with customers. We have not yet completed a project in that way. So it's definitely an option and definitely something we've considered and would be very open to doing. And I think many other developers would feel the same way. We just haven't completed a project in that way.
Thanks, Jill. And then another question, do you need to connect with the roof manufacturer prior to submitting a quote to know what steps need to be taken to not void the roof warranties? So any specific details that have to be done there before issuing the RFP?
So we include in our scope of work that they should budget for that. I'm not entirely sure what the estimated cost is. I can take a look and get that over to you guys. If you have a roof warranty, that is always, important to just attach to the RFP. More information is better than less, so they can see who the manufacturer is. They may have worked with them before. And then, as part of our scope of work, we require that you basically contact that whoever holds the roof warranty, figure out what needs to be done in order to maintain it. And typically, you basically just get whoever holds the roof warranty to come out and do the flashings over any roof penetrations, and that allows you to maintain the warranty.
Thanks, Victoria. So we are at the initial allotted time for the industry experts panel. Now we're going to transition to some time for each of you to sit down in your RFP template and start actually working on the highlighted sections of the scope of work.